I never thought a Tuesday night would turn into something I'd replay in my head for weeks, but here we are. So picture this. I show up to a cooking class, not because I'm some aspiring chef or anything, but because my friend dared me to do something social and fun besides binge watching Netflix alone. Honestly, I was just there to survive 2 hours of chopping and stirring without embarrassing myself. The place was one of those trendy kitchen studios downtown, the kind with sleek stainless steel everywhere, and those giant industrial ovens that look like they belong on a spaceship. I'm hovering near the back, trying to look like I know what I'm doing, when they announce we'll be paired up for the main dish. Naturally, my heart sinks a little, because I'm terrible at cooking, and even worse at teamwork. That's when he walks over tall, with this effortless kind of confidence that makes you notice without even trying. His shirt was a casual button-up with the sleeves rolled just right, and he had this easy smile that somehow made me forget all my awkwardness. His name was Luke, and as he reached out to shake my hand, I thought, okay, maybe this won't be a total disaster. But then, as we started working through the recipe, something weird happened. Every few minutes, Luke's hand would brush against mine. At first, I thought it was accidental, like when two people end up in the same cramped kitchen station and you just happen to touch. But nope, it kept happening. And not just a quick touch either. It was like he was looking for a reason to stay connected, to break that invisible bubble I didn't even know I'd built around myself. At first, I was frozen, partly because I wasn't sure if he was just friendly or if this was some kind of awkward flirting, and partly because I wasn't used to this kind of attention. I mean, I'm not exactly a heartbreaker or a super smooth guy, so this was new territory. My hands were shaky, not just because I was trying to dice onions, but because every time he touched me, my brain caught fire. Then there was this moment where he leaned in a little too close to read the recipe, and our faces were maybe inches apart. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. And just when I thought I might muster the courage to say something, anything, he smiled, that kind of smile that makes you feel like, maybe, just maybe, he's been waiting for the chance to do exactly what he was doing all along. That's how it started. Me, stuck in this cooking class, paired with the guy who couldn't stop touching me, and suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was there to learn how to make pasta, or to fall into something I hadn't been expecting at all. I tried to focus on the pasta dough, folding and kneading like the instructor said, but honestly, my hands were all over the place. Luke's presence was distracting in the best and worst way. Every now and then, his fingers would brush mine while we reached for a bowl or grabbed a utensil, and each time, I felt like I was rewiring my brain. It's funny how something as simple as a touch can make you feel 10 different things at once. Nervous, excited, confused, hopeful. At one point, I cracked an egg into the bowl and it kind of slipped, dripping a bit on the counter. Luke was right there, grabbing a paper towel before I could even blink. "Got it," he said, his voice low and warm, eyes locking with mine. That simple moment, him helping me without hesitation, made me realize this wasn't just casual flirting. There was something about the way he moved, like he genuinely wanted to be close, like I wasn't just another person in the room. So, he said, leaning a little closer than before, "Have you done this kind of thing before? Cooking classes, I mean?" I swallowed hard, still trying to hide the fact that my hands were shaking a bit. "Not really. I'm more of a microwave and call it dinner kind of guy." He laughed, this rich, easy sound that filled the space between us. "Well, you're doing better than most first-timers I've seen." There was a pause, and then he added, "Maybe I should show you some tricks after class." I almost choked on my own breath. Was that an invitation? Or just friendly banter? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to pass it up. "I'd like that," I said, trying to sound casual even though my stomach was doing somersaults. We kept working together, and I noticed little things. The way he'd stand close enough that our elbows touched when we stirred, or how his hand would linger just a second too long on my shoulder as he reached for a spice jar. It felt electric, like there was a current running between us. I wasn't ready to admit was there. As the class moved on, the instructor announced we'd get to taste each other's dishes at the end. I felt a weird mix of excitement and dread. I mean, what if the pasta turned out terrible? What if Luke thought I was a disaster in more ways than one? But he just smiled at me, like he already knew this was going to be fun. When it was finally time to taste, Luke scooped some of our dish onto his plate and handed it over. "Try this," he said, eyes twinkling. I took a bite and was surprised. It was actually good. Maybe not Michelin star level, but definitely edible, and made better by the company. Then, out of nowhere, he reached over and grabbed my wrist, pulling me a little closer. "You know," he said, voice dropping a notch, "I'm glad we got paired up tonight." I blinked, caught off guard, my heart thudding in my chest. "Yeah, me too." He didn't say anything more, just smiled that same knowing smile and gave my wrist a gentle squeeze before letting go. The rest of the class felt like a blur, but I remember thinking, I didn't want this night to end. After we cleaned up, Luke and I found ourselves lingering by the counter, neither of us wanting to make the first move to leave. Finally, he shoved his hands in his pockets and said, "Hey, there's a coffee shop around the corner. Want to grab a drink? Maybe talk about how we survived this chaos?" I laughed, feeling more relaxed now. Yeah, I could use a drink after all this. As we walked out together, side by side, I realized I hadn't even asked him what he did for a living or how old he was. None of that seemed to matter right now. What mattered was this weird, unexpected connection with a guy who couldn't stop touching me during a cooking class, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something worth exploring. The night air was cool, and Luke bumped my shoulder lightly as we crossed the street. That simple contact made me smile like an idiot. I wanted to see where this went, even if I had no idea what I was getting into. And honestly, that scared me just as much as it excited me. But sometimes, you just have to take the chance. The coffee shop Luke led me to wasn't one of those crowded, hipster places with triple espresso shots and indie bands blasting. It was cozy, dimly lit with soft jazz playing low in the background. A place where you could actually hear yourself think, or in this case, awkwardly try to make conversation without sounding like a complete dork. We grabbed a small table by the window, and Luke slid into the seat across from me with that same easy smile that was somehow both comforting and nerve-wracking. I ordered a black coffee, mostly because I was nervous and figured caffeine might help me stay awake and coherent. Luke, on the other hand, went for a chai latte, which suited him, warm, maybe a little sweet, but with a kick. "So," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table, "tell me about you. What's your story?" I wanted to give him the usual boring answer, work, hobbies, the whole 9 yards. But something about the way he looked at me made me want to be honest. Honestly, I'm not great at this whole social thing. I work in IT, which means I spend most of my day behind a screen, talking to computers instead of people. Cooking's not really my thing, but my friend dared me to try something new. He laughed again, that genuine laugh that made me want to lean in closer to hear more. "Sounds like you needed a shake-up. I'm Luke, by the way. Graphic designer, slightly obsessed with food, and apparently a bit touchy." I raised an eyebrow. "Touchy? You mean, can't keep his hands to himself?" He grinned. "Guilty as charged. I guess I just don't like to keep people at arm's length. Life's too short for that." I found myself nodding, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. It was weird how quickly I was letting my guard down with this guy. Maybe it was the atmosphere, the wine glass shape of his chai latte, or just the fact that he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. We talked about everything and nothing. Our favorite movies, terrible dating stories, the weird quirks of our families. Luke had this way of making even the most mundane stuff feel interesting, like he was genuinely curious. And not just making polite conversation. At some point, his hand found its way to the edge of the table, and before I could think twice, mine was there, resting lightly against his. The contact was electric but calm, like a quiet promise. Neither of us said anything about it, but I'm pretty sure we both felt it. Then, out of nowhere, Luke tilted his head and asked, "Can I be honest? I've been wanting to touch you since we got paired up. It's like every time I brushed your hand during the class, I was hoping you'd notice and not pull away." I blinked, caught off guard. "Really? I thought you were just being friendly." He smiled softly. "Maybe I was, but maybe I was hoping for more. I didn't want to freak you out, though." "I haven't been freaked out," I admitted. "I was just surprised. But now I'm glad you didn't stop." That felt like a turning point, like the invisible wall between us had cracked open enough for something real to start slipping through. Luke's smile grew, and he squeezed my hand gently before pulling it back. not wanting to rush anything. We finished our drinks, and as we stepped outside, the city felt different, like the usual noise and chaos had backgrounded to something softer and more personal. Luke looked over at me and said, "So what's next? Cooking class every Tuesday now, or should we just skip to date number 2? I laughed, a little breathless from nerves and excitement. "I think I'm ready for date number 2. He grinned, and as we walked away from the coffee shop, I realized I was smiling for the first time in a long time. Not just the polite kind, but the kind that comes from knowing maybe, just maybe, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Over the next week, I found myself thinking about Luke more than I probably should have. I kept replaying the way his hand felt in mine at that coffee shop, how his smile had this quiet confidence that made it feel like he was looking right through all my awkwardness and still choosing to stick around. I wasn't usually this guy, the one who got butterflies over a simple touch, but this was new, and I was curious if it could actually turn into something real. So when he texted me the next day, ready for round 2? I promised less pasta, more fun. I didn't hesitate to say yes. We met at a little tapas bar that Friday night. It was the kind of place with low lighting and small plates meant for sharing, which felt perfect for a first real date. Luke arrived a few minutes late, but he had that easy grin and a casual vibe that made me forget about the time. "Sorry, traffic was a nightmare," he said, as he slid into the seat across from me. "But I brought reinforcements." He pulled out a small paper bag and handed me a piece of dark chocolate. "Emergency snack, for the pasta trauma." I laughed, and just like that, whatever nervous tension I'd been carrying melted away. We ordered a bunch of dishes, patatas bravas, grilled octopus, chorizo, and as we passed plates back and forth, I got to see this side of Luke that was playful but also thoughtful. He asked about my week, about my family, and really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. At one point, the conversation drifted to dating disasters, and Luke shared a story about a guy who'd ghosted him after 3 dates because he wasn't ready for a commitment. I could tell it still stung a little, and I found myself wanting to be the guy who didn't run. "I get it," I said quietly. "I've had my fair share of awkward endings too. But maybe that's why this feels different, like we're both tired of the usual crap." He nodded, eyes locked on mine. "Yeah, maybe." There was this moment when our hands met on the table again, fingers intertwining naturally like we'd done it 1,000 times before. It felt less electric this time, more comforting, like finding a safe place. After dinner, we wandered through the city streets, just talking and laughing under the glow of street lamps. I learned he loved old jazz records, and that he'd once tried to learn the guitar but gave up because his fingers hurt too much. I told him about my obsession with sci-fi movies and how I could probably recite entire scenes from Star Trek. At one point, we stopped by a little park bench, and Luke turned to me with that same earnest look. "Can I be honest again? I really like you. Like, more than I expected." My heart skipped. "I like you too. More than I thought I would." We leaned in slowly, and this time, when our lips met, it was soft and sure, like everything else had just been leading to this moment. It wasn't fireworks or dramatic explosions, just a quiet, steady feeling of rightness. Afterward, we stayed wrapped up on that bench for a while, just holding on to each other, neither of us wanting to face the night alone. There was a calmness in Luke's arms that I didn't realize I'd been craving. When we finally parted that night, it wasn't with a rushed goodbye, but a promise to see each other again soon. That weekend, I was walking around with this stupidly big grin, feeling like maybe I'd finally stumbled onto something worth holding on to. The way Luke's hand felt in mine, the way he looked at me like I mattered. That was all I needed to start believing in that possibility. And honestly, I was excited to see where this went, even if it meant stepping way out of my comfort zone. Because sometimes, the best things happen when you least expect them. And when you least expect it, a guy who can't stop touching you might just be the one to change everything. The days after that date felt like walking on a cloud. I kept catching myself smiling at nothing, texting Luke way more than I usually text anyone, and replaying that moment on the park bench when our lips finally met. It wasn't just the excitement of a new crush. It was something deeper, like I was finally allowing myself to hope. We kept hanging out, not always doing anything fancy. Sometimes it was just grabbing takeout and watching old movies at my place. Other times wandering the city with no real destination. But every time Luke's presence felt like this steady anchor, calming the chaos of my head and making the world seem a little less overwhelming. One afternoon, about a week after our tapas date, Luke surprised me by showing up at my apartment with a bag from that same cooking studio where we met. "Thought we could practice without the pressure of a class," he said, grinning like he'd just pulled off some kind of master plan. I was a little nervous. Cooking with Luke again? After all the nervousness and accidental touches in class, I wasn't sure if I was ready for another round. But I also couldn't say no. We spent the afternoon fumbling over chopping boards and saucepans, laughing at our mistakes. Luke was patient, showing me how to hold a knife properly, how to season without overdoing it. At one point, I reached for a spoon at the same time he did, and our hands bumped. Instead of pulling away, his fingers curled around mine, holding on a moment longer than I expected. I looked up, and he was watching me with that soft, intent expression that made my skin tingle. "Hey, you're getting better," he said quietly. "Thanks to you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We finished the meal together and sat down to eat, the food not perfect, but made perfect because we'd made it together. As we ate, the conversation turned more personal. Luke told me about his childhood, how he'd grown up in a small town, always feeling like the odd one out. I shared some of my own stories, awkward first crushes, growing up feeling like I was constantly hiding parts of myself. There was an honesty between us that felt rare, like we were building something real, piece by piece. Later, when the plates were cleared, Luke leaned back, looking thoughtful. "I know we're moving fast, but I want to be honest. I haven't felt this way about someone in a long time. It scares me a little." I nodded, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. "I'm scared too, but I think that's what makes it worth it." He smiled then, that same easy, genuine smile, and reached across the table to take my hand. It felt like a promise, a beginning. As the weeks went on, our relationship grew in this quiet, steady way. We weren't rushing. We were just being. Cooking became our thing, sometimes a complete disaster, sometimes surprisingly good. We'd tease each other over burnt edges or under-seasoned sauces, but there was always laughter. One evening, a few weeks after that cooking day at my place, Luke and I were sprawled on the couch, half watching a movie, when he suddenly reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I turned to look at him. "Can I ask you something?" he said softly. "Anything. Why did you let me touch you so much that first night?" "At the class?" I thought about it. Honestly, I think I was scared. Scared of what it meant, but also curious. You made me feel safe even when I didn't know I needed it. And I guess I didn't want you to stop. Luke smiled, eyes shining. "Good, because I'm not planning to stop anytime soon." That night, as he pulled me close, I realized how much I'd opened up, how much I'd let someone in. And it wasn't just about the touches or the dates. It was about trusting someone enough to be vulnerable. Looking back, I'm still amazed by how a simple cooking class led me to Luke, the guy who couldn't stop touching me, who ended up touching my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. And honestly, I can't wait to see what comes next. A few days after that night on the couch, I found myself pacing my apartment like an idiot. Luke had invited me to a small get-together with some of his friends, and for the first time I was about to meet people who knew him outside of our little bubble. I wasn't sure what to expect. Meeting a partner's friends always feels like a weird test, and I was already second-guessing myself. Would they like me? Would I seem awkward? Most of all, would Luke still want to hold my hand in front of a room full of strangers? When I arrived at his place, Luke opened the door with that same warm smile that instantly put me at ease. "You look nervous," he teased, as he slipped an arm around my waist. "Maybe a little," I admitted. "Don't sweat it. They're all great. Plus, you've got me." That was true, and I let myself relax a bit as we stepped inside together. His friends were laughing in the living room, a mix of artists, musicians, and tech geeks, kind of like a mini creative collective. Luke introduced me smoothly, tossing in little anecdotes that made me laugh. "This is the guy who managed to survive my cooking class without burning down the kitchen." There were smiles and friendly nods, and surprisingly, I didn't feel like an outsider. Luke's friends were easygoing, warm, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. We played a few rounds of a silly card game, shared stories, and Luke kept finding moments to squeeze my hand or rest his leg against mine under the coffee table. It was like a secret language between us that only we understood. Later, as the evening wound down and the crowd thinned, Luke and I slipped out to the balcony. The city skyline glittered behind us, and the air was cooler, crisp with that promise of early spring. "I'm glad you came," Luke said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Me too," I said, leaning into his embrace. There was a peacefulness in that moment, a quiet understanding. But then Luke pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Of course. I've been thinking we've been moving pretty fast, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. How do you feel about us?" I took a breath. "Honestly, it's been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. I'm scared sometimes, but I'm also really happy. I want to see where this goes." His eyes softened, and he smiled. "Me too. I don't want to rush, but I also don't want to hold back." We stayed out there for a while longer, just soaking it in, before heading back inside. That night, as we fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, I felt closer to Luke than ever before. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. We cooked together, explored parts of the city we hadn't seen, and shared small moments that felt big, the way he'd brush a stray hair from my forehead, or how I'd catch him staring when he thought I wasn't looking. But then, one afternoon, Luke seemed distracted. We were sitting in a cafe, and he kept checking his phone, his smile a little forced. "Everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Yeah, just some stuff with work. It's been stressful." I nodded, trying to hide the pang of worry. "Do you want to talk about it?" Luke shook his head. "Not really. I don't want to drag you into it." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Luke, whatever it is, I'm here." He looked at me then, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Thanks. That means a lot." That moment felt like a shift, like the easy days we'd had were giving way to something more complicated. But I realized then that real relationships aren't just about the good times. They're about holding on when things get messy too. We started opening up more about our fears and insecurities, and while it wasn't always comfortable, it made us stronger. One night, after a long conversation about past heartbreaks and hopes for the future, Luke pulled me close and said, "I've never felt this safe with anyone before, and for the first time, I knew exactly what that meant." It wasn't just about the touches or the smiles. It was about trust. About choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. So yeah, maybe we started as two guys paired up in a cooking class, awkward and unsure. But now, we're something else entirely. Maybe still figuring it out, but doing it together. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. A couple of weeks after that conversation in the cafe, things felt like they'd settled into a rhythm that was both comfortable and exciting. We were no longer just two guys testing the waters. We were a team, figuring out what it meant to share life's small moments and its bigger uncertainties. One Saturday morning, I got a text from Luke. "You up for a day adventure? I know a place you'll love." I was intrigued. Luke was always full of surprises when it came to exploring the city, and I was eager for anything that meant spending more time with him. I quickly replied, "Absolutely." When I showed up at his place, he was already waiting with a backpack slung over one shoulder and that same mischievous grin I'd come to adore. "Packed and ready?" he asked. "For sure," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and curiosity. We hopped on the subway, and after a short ride, we emerged into a neighborhood I barely knew, a quiet, artsy part of town with colorful murals and tiny cafes tucked between old brick buildings. Luke led me down streets lined with bookstores and little boutiques I'd never noticed before. Our first stop was a small, hole-in-the-wall bakery that smelled like cinnamon and freshly baked bread. Luke grabbed 2 croissants, and as we sat on a bench nearby, I watched the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the city. His voice animated as he pointed out hidden gems and secret spots only locals knew. It was during moments like these, sitting side by side, sharing food, laughing over silly jokes, that I felt the depth of what was happening between us. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people slowly peeling back layers and finding comfort in the space they created together. Later, we wandered into a tiny bookstore that specialized in old novels and poetry. Luke picked up a worn copy of Neruda's love poems and handed it to me. "You should read this. It's beautiful, and it kind of reminds me of you, unexpected and real." I felt my cheeks flush. "I'll take that as a compliment." He winked. "Definitely." On the way out, I noticed a small cafe tucked in the corner, with a sign advertising live music that evening. Luke's eyes sparkled. "How about we come back later? Maybe you'll get to hear me attempt to play the guitar again." I laughed. "I'd like that, as long as you promise not to break any strings." That night, we returned to the cafe, and Luke nervously tuned his guitar backstage while I found us a table near the small stage. When he started playing, it wasn't perfect, more like charmingly amateurish, but there was an honesty in his voice that drew me in. Watching him there, vulnerable and open, made me realize how much trust we'd built in such a short time. After his set, we walked back to my apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow on the sidewalks. Luke slipped his hand into mine without hesitation, and I squeezed back, feeling like we were exactly where we were meant to be. But just as the happiness was settling in, life reminded me it wasn't always that simple. The following week, I got a call from my parents. My dad had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and suddenly, the future felt heavy with uncertainty. I was overwhelmed, trying to process the news while keeping up with work, and, most importantly, not wanting to burden Luke. I didn't know how to tell him without sounding like I was asking for pity, or that I was too fragile to handle it. But Luke, as always, sensed something was off. One evening, after a quiet dinner at my place, he looked at me and said, "You're distant. Talk to me." I took a deep breath and finally opened up about my dad's diagnosis, the fear gnawing at me, and the feeling of being caught between hope and despair. Luke didn't say much at first. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me and held me close. "I'm here," he whispered. "We'll get through this together." In that moment, all the walls I'd built around my worries crumbled. I let myself lean on him, let myself be vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. Over the next few weeks, Luke became my anchor. He came with me to doctors, appointments, cooked meals when I didn't have the energy, and stayed up late listening to me ramble about fears I didn't even understand myself. Our relationship deepened not just in the easy, joyful moments, but in the hard ones too. One night, after a particularly tough day, I looked at him and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled softly, brushing a hand over my cheek. "You don't have to find out." Through all of it, the uncertainty, the fear, the late-night conversations, I realized that love isn't just about the perfect moments or grand gestures. It's about showing up when it's messy. It's about holding on even when you don't have all the answers. And with Luke by my side, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could face whatever came next. Together, months passed, and through all the ups and downs, Luke and I kept finding our way back to each other, steadier, stronger. My dad's health stabilized, not without its challenges, but the weight felt lighter knowing Luke was there. He wasn't just a boyfriend, he was my partner, my quiet support when the world felt chaotic. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, I came home exhausted and emotionally drained. Luke was waiting in the kitchen, a simple dinner simmering on the stove. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the apartment. Comfort food, his way of saying, "I'm here." We ate in comfortable silence, and after clearing the dishes, we sat on the couch. I looked at him, the way his eyes softened when he smiled, how his hand found mine without hesitation. "Remember that cooking class where we first met?" I asked, a small grin tugging at my lips. He chuckled. "How could I forget? You trying not to burn the place down and me being way too touchy?" I squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you were." Luke's smile deepened, and suddenly he was serious. "Me too. It's been the start of something I never expected, but don't want to ever let go of." In that moment, I realized how far we'd come. From two strangers awkwardly paired up, to people who knew each other's fears and dreams. There was a quiet assurance between us, a gentle promise that, no matter what, we'd face life side by side. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn recipe card, the same one from our first cooking class, scribbled with notes and flour smudges. "I kept this," he said softly, "for all the times we'll cook together, and maybe for the messy moments too." I felt my throat tighten. It was more than just a card. It was a symbol of everything we'd built, a connection born from simple touches, honest conversations, and patience. Leaning in, I kissed him softly, feeling the warmth and peace I hadn't known I was searching for. It wasn't some grand gesture or perfect moment, just two people choosing each other again and again. Later, as we settled in for the night, I thought about how unexpected this all had been. How a random cooking class pairing led me to someone who could touch not just my skin, but the parts of me I'd kept hidden. Love, I realized, isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and gentle, like a hand finding yours in the middle of a crowded kitchen and never letting go. And honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way.